All this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from Drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So once again with us we have our resident statistician Paul Bork, and we'll discuss COVID and many things related. Just a couple of quick notes. Number one, happy Eid to anyone who is celebrating. Number two, yes, I have lost weight. Before Ramadan, my weight was about 174, which was more for my height, and I was worried about it that I was gaining weight. Then during Ramadan, my practice had been that I will just take a glass of water in the morning, 4 or 5 a.m., and then one meal at the dinner time about 7:30 p.m. And of course, as part of the Ramadan, there is nothing else, no food, water, or anything. And I also tried that my food plate is half of my regular plates. So you can imagine that I cut down my food. Breakfast was gone, lunch was gone, and dinner was half. So my current weight after 29 days is 162 pounds. So it went down from 174 to 162. So I think that is what you see. Now I'm worried that I'm going to start gaining it again because Ramadan is over. So with this, back to Paul. Paul, welcome and take it away.
Thank you very much, Mobeen. Glad to be here. So here we're going to talk about the XBB.1.16, which Mobeen talked about just a little while ago. We're going to talk about suicide, and after suicide, we have to talk about happiness. And a couple people asked for pictures of my dog or puppy, and I've included those, and maybe it'll help people feel a little better. And I've got a model for piracy among leaders, because people sometimes wonder why leaders seem to always go astray or seem to have some problems. And I have something to say about that I've observed that you might find interesting or useful. There it is. So our world in data, you notice here that it's April 10th. Well, that's the latest they've updated it. And I added India to the list of countries that we had before to show the diversity. And you can see India has a whole bunch of the XB.1.16. And other countries don't have so much. South Korea has just a little, and a couple of countries have some, but nowhere near what India is experiencing. And we'll talk a little more about what India does. But first, what is it and how is it related? We go to the nextstrain.com. They have drawn a diagram here. And again, the little COVID variants or variant groups don't come with labels. They just sort of stuck them where they think they go based on the number of variants or whatever. And based on the prior one, the only things we have new are the ones with the little blue circles around it. We have the XB.191, 192, and 1.16, and an FD2 over here. So these are the only ones that showed up that weren't there the last time I talked, which was roughly a month ago. And this is how the labeling follows the same thing with the B and the BA and whatever going forward with the labels. But keep in mind, as we said before, these are variant groups, and there's a whole bunch of different variants and changes that occur inside the body of everyone that's infected, and they group them together, and then they will say, well, what they're calling in the press a variant is a group of them that they're calling together, and then the family is something that they group together that they think goes together for a particular reason. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about how it's different. Here is an analysis that we had from the nextstrain.com. If you take a look up here, it talks about the relative to the BA2, what the immune escape is. And they obviously have volunteer data here because they don't even have the same format. And so I drew a line to help you see the immune escape was a 0.907. It went to a 0.909. Not very much difference at all. And the ACE2 binding went from, and this is the, with a little yellow circle, the XB1.5, and this is XB1.16, went from 1.012 to 0.8 1.16. So the 1.16 has about a 15% less strong binding, and the immune escape is roughly the same. And so you could look at this and just say, well, I'm not sure that this 1.16 is really going to overwhelm the XBB.1.5. It doesn't matter what we think, because what will happen in the real world will happen in the real world, and we'll go forward. And just like the weather people and the finance people, after it's done, they have all kinds of reasons why it's occurring, but trying to predict what's going to happen in the future is a little more difficult. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions?
Yes, it does.
Now let's look at India. And here is going all the way back to 2020. And here is the current rate going up as reported. Again, governments might misreport, underreport, change reporting, but if we want to say the government numbers aren't any good, then there's really nothing to talk about, and we can just sit here doing nothing. And so we have to sort of accept this as the baseline because it's the only data. And so I took a look at the upward rate that we have and put an arrow on it, and then duplicated the arrow with the same slope and brought it over for the prior peaks in India. And every country is a bit different, but you can see the prior peak went up at about the same rate the current is going on. The peak before that was much, much, much faster. Peak before that was faster, but not as much as this peak. And then the initial peak was faster, but again, the slowest of the three. And the last two seem to be fairly close. And someone could say, well, let's zoom in on that. And so, okay, let's do that. So here's zooming in on the last two peaks. And you can see that this is less than the slope. It's coming down. So it was that fast about this point. And then when it got up here at about the 6 million or 6 per cases per million, the slope is already starting to come down, and it's less than. And here, again, we have the slope that I projected down here when it's at 3 to 4, and here and up in this area, it's starting to fall down. And if you look very closely at the last two dots, it looks like the rate is substantially coming down. And one of the easiest ways to tell is not just the difference for the slope of the line versus the purple line, but look at the distance between the points. If it had continued to go on with the same number of increasing in terms of number of new cases per million increase, the dot would be the same distance away as it was for the prior day, and it's about half the distance. So we may be getting very close to the peak for this XB 1.16 going on. And if we go back to where we were with all the peaks, if this one peaks out about at this point, it'll be roughly the same as the prior one. And will it come down the same way? No way to know. But if it went up the same way, it might come down the same way. It seems more likely than these others that came down very quickly. And why are they coming down quickly versus coming down slowly? There has to be something about the infection that's causing it. Why did this rate not just keep coming down until it hit 0? Well, it pulled out and it stretched out in a long time, just like this peak did for some reason. And so the end of it looks a lot more like the end of these two than it does of the end of this. And so is there a different...
Sorry, my apologies for the interruption. Meeple Art says, where are stats taken from anyways? Positive tests in hospitals? So source of the stats.
The source is right over here where the red is. It's Our World in Data. Go to Our World of Data and you click on cases for India. So it's what the government of India is reporting.
Got it. Thank you. And John, I think yes to this question, XBB.1.16. Actually, there is a subvariant as well, 1.16.1. And I think this originated in India. Back to you, Paul.
Here we have the blow up. And now we're done with that. I didn't have anything else to say that I could find on it. But looking at the CEC data for the United States, we have the last, they're about a month apart. So these are the last 4 months. You see the rate coming down, and comparing just the last two, the number of cases increased by 0.38%, and the number of deaths increased by 0.427%. So that's a 13% increase in the number of a greater number of deaths increase than there were number of cases. That doesn't mean that they're more lethal. It may actually have a lot to do with what's occurring over here, is that they're clearing cases, that they had people that were holding on for a long time that were very sick, and some of them perhaps died, and that's why the number of cases are down 70%.
Got it. But this all is an assumption yet.
Yeah, but these are the data that the U.S. is reporting. The current number of hospitalized, the current deaths, and the current cases. And so, like when
So here is a very good question. Sorry. So Christina says, the real question is, do we need to worry?
No. Look at the number of people hospitalized. It's coming down from 40,000, 30,000, 14, 4,000. Suppose they're off by some factor of 20 or 2x. The number of cases is a tenth of what it was before. We're not having people sick nearly as much. The fact that we're having more dead here is interesting, but again, that may have more to do with treatment than the fact that the new variants are more deadly or anything else. If the new variants were more deadly, I would think that the number of hospitalized would go way up.
That's true.
We know these numbers are wrong, because I know, at least for myself, the 4 times I think I had it, I never reported anything. My 4 cases aren't there, and I don't think, Mobeen, any of your cases are in those numbers either, are they?
I actually, the very first time I did it, or I had COVID, I did it. I had COVID. I called my doctor and I said, I have COVID. Shouldn't I go for testing so I can be added? He said, no, just stay at home and that's fine. So that's how life is.
Right. So these numbers may have false positives, but I do believe that they are grossly underreported. Now, here's the CDC breakdown for the regions, and the CDC data is updated as of today. They changed it, and so right before I came on, I was updating the slides here, and you can see, looking at focusing at the colors are horrible here. You've got light blue, darker blue. Anyway,
I'm sure that they used $1 billion to come up with these colors. Why are you criticizing them?
Yeah, well, I would say the first reason I'm criticizing is just because CDC is the name, because they almost always do things wrong. But what they probably did is they got the colors from the beginning, and green was taken up by alpha, and so they can never use green again in their graphs or something like that.
So I have a very quick tidbit to add over here. Did you see that NIH has actually already spent about $1 billion on long COVID studies, where the only significant study information that came out was that they were asking people to exercise, and there is nothing else to show for it. $1 billion. Sorry, back to you. I digress.
I'm not surprised. They continue to. Well, again, at the end, I'm talking about why leaders might have some problems. So maybe we can revisit that at that point. But you can see that we don't have just one infection across America, that we have if you look at the bright blue, which is probably easiest to see, we've got a huge difference in some of the regions. And of course, the states inside the regions may have the same type or even greater diversity than the regions do. And here, for effective today, is their projection of where we are for the last month, and the data for last month, basically. And so this number right here, this number 73, is down from what they projected last week to have. So their numbers are continually getting revised, but this is the data that we have. And it's showing that we're continuing to have new variants come in and doing well. And the real question is whether they're going to be XBB.1.5 or the 1.16. Are we going to get the 1.16 coming in, or are we going to get something else? And I don't know, but looking at that analysis and the detail on it, I'm not seeing that either the binding affinity to the receptor or the escape as they measured are showing that the new Indian variant, the 1.116, has a real advantage over the XBB.1.5. It's amazing we're still staying with Omicron and haven't changed, but the treatment is being consistent, and so that may be a good thing to do. Here is the wastewater. And to go back to the question before, should we worry? This slide up here shows the relative number, the weighted number of COVID detections per milliliter that they're having. You can see the numbers are way, way down. We've almost never had it that low over the time. So it's showing that the infection across America is low. Now, they don't have very good coverage of America, but to the extent they are representing it, it's showing no crisis. In fact, things are getting better than they've been even a short while ago. And these are the different variants coming in, and you can see that this is kind of reflecting the same data that they showed for the CDC based on samples. And again, I want to emphasize, these are not cases, these are new cases. And so if a case takes an average of a week to be done, then for the first week, the new cases might be here, but you've got old cases that are based on what the mixture was before. And so the sewage is based on what you actually see. So the sewage is more of a measure of what the actual infection is and not biased towards the new cases. And so these graphs are measuring something slightly different. And the different colors they have up here, well, I was a little lazy, and so here's the old slide. And these are the colors for the regions that they used. And there are the regions. There they are. Now let's go to the UK, and this data was updated today as well. You can see the little peak that we were worried about coming down, and this was the projection pretty much that we had, that the overall upper side was coming down, and this was that the lower side was also coming down. And the little peak, I said, oh, obviously I was wrong about the slope. Well, given how fast it peaked and coming down, this may be more right than I thought last time I presented. Again, same analysis as before, taking the slope and comparing it to prior slopes to see is this infection decreasing faster, slower, and whatever. We go all the way back here, it was decreasing about the same rate. This one was about the same, but all the others were, this one was decreasing slower than it is on this one, the current. This was decreasing faster. This one much faster, much faster, much faster, much faster. And so the only decrease that was slower was the immediate prior one. And what does this mean? Does this have something to do with the amount of immunity that's out there, natural or vaccine induced? Or does this have to do with the difference between the various variant groups and how they infectious they are and how the immune escape works? I don't know. But we're seeing it decrease, and it's not decreasing as fast. The peaks aren't going as high. And so here we may have a disease that is more infectious, and it sort of infects everyone that's susceptible to it right away. In this case, it may not be as infectious, and it may just take longer to get to everybody that's there. Or it may be that people are isolating differently than they did before. It's really hard to say. And I think, as I said before, there'll be many papers, and I'm sure CDC and National Institute will spend another billions of dollars studying this afterwards to tell us what happened.
True.
Here's the slide that I had back when I first was projecting it. And so it came down, back up, and back down. And so this is pretty much the same. I haven't calculated before, but it's in the neighborhood of a year to get to 0 cases with where it's decreasing. And the bottom is decreasing much slower, even though it's lower. And this says roughly 3 years until it hits 0. And so we're, again, go back to the important question, is there anything to worry about? No. Things are getting better. We can argue whether they're getting better at the rate we thought they were or less, but we're between about Well, certainly no faster than 6 months, 9 months to 3 years is what the data shows here. And this is the UK data for symptomatic cases. And this is based on 2-day delay from CPR and lateral flow and however many cases they get. And so I didn't revise it because I think the data really doesn't justify making little tweaks because the peak is up or down a little bit. It's really the same thing that we can see and the same thing that we could project just based on the data.
Quick note, my apologies again. Mel W says, if people are still immune naive, no vax and no infection, should they be concerned? So I'm going to take a shot at it first. This is a very interesting question. So I think about this a lot, that there are people who are still immune naive, maybe because they are still keeping themselves isolated, or maybe they have those genetic factors that actually do not allow them to become sick, as is the study going on in Canada, or maybe they actually did become asymptomatically infected, or maybe they just do not have it for whatever reason. And now, if you think about it, that is their track record, that almost about 1 billion people became infected and then rest are not, maybe they don't have to worry. But it really depends upon how were they protected. If they were just going about their normal business and they never had any issue, then I think they're protected as well, because they may actually have been exposed in the past. But if they were isolated and still isolated, then there is no guarantee either way saying you'll be fine or saying you will not be fine. I think in that case, we should see comorbidities and age. I do believe this very strongly, that the herd immunity that is developing, as much as we say that there is no herd immunity for this, but still we are developing immunity that is protective. Plus, I also believe that those who are healthier, younger, they have less impact of the virus. And I do believe that the virus itself is also becoming humanized and adapting. So generally, I would consider that the risk is less, but I cannot guarantee that. So back to you, Paul.
I have 2 things to add to it. First, there's another group of people that you've overlooked, and that's the new people, the babies, that weren't infected because they weren't around, weren't exposed. And there's none of that stuff that you talked about that would tend to protect them. But the second thing is they are better protected because of the virus mutating to evade infection. Because as it mutates to evade infection, everything else being the same, it will be less effective in infecting someone who doesn't have any immunity, because it can't keep both going. I mean, I think back to the days where we were doing track. You don't have someone who is a sprinter and a cross-country runner. You do one or the other, and you might do them in, one, and then 2 years later run the other, but you're not going to change in 6 months from a sprinter to a long-distance runner. And that's kind of what I see here. If the optimization of the mutations of the amino acids and everything is set up to help escape and to help do well in people who have very strong immune systems and just got a vaccination, well, then the person that has nothing at all can say, great, keep focusing on that one. I'll be a little better off. And again, there's still going to be people, I think, across the planet in all these categories who are going to get infected, are going to get sick, and some will probably die. I mean, there's nothing that we can do to make this a safe virus, and we aren't, but we're just saying overall, the numbers are showing that it's going forward. And maybe this herd immunity that we were talking about, that they said, no, it can't occur and whatever, maybe that's where these green and red arrows are poking to, is showing that we may reach a point where there is herd immunity. And let's back up a second and understand why they call it herd immunity. It's not immunity through the herd. It's the herd is immune, not every animal in the herd is immune. So if I have a immune herd of cows and a disease comes in and the herd is immune, it means I won't get the whole herd infected. I may get 2 or 3 cows infected out of my 100 cows, or I may get 20 infected. But the herd itself is immune. And so that's, I think, the direction that we're going. Does that sound right?
That does. And I saw a presenter a few days ago, very popular, bigger presenter than I am, was trying to say that the protection is because of the T cells, which are triggered because of the vaccines, and COVID doesn't do it. So that I think is just, I sometimes, it baffles my mind that how people just make up conjectures to try to take one side or the other. We should just look at the studies. So M. Gregory says, if the mother was vaxxed, then wouldn't the baby considered vaxxed too? Very good question. So, uh, if mother is vaccinated and the baby was developing while, so she was pregnant, then it is possible that she would have given IgGs to the baby, which would stay with baby for some months. But that will not be that baby's immune system has become trained. Similarly, if mother is breastfeeding, then IgA would be present in the milk, but that doesn't mean that the baby's immune system has become trained. So baby will be protected, the newborn will be protected for some months. However, if there is a baby that is uh, of some months, has been born and is of some months, and mother has become vaccinated, then if baby is getting breastfed, then remember I did a study. One, they would get IgA, and secondly, it is possible that some mRNA is present in the milk as well. The authors had said we do not know what is the quantity of that, and is that sufficient to become be able to trigger enough immune system reaction. So I think it will not be. So short answer may be no. Sorry, back to you, Paul.
Okay. Now let's look at the next strain. This is the same picture we had before, except I've added the XBB.1.16, which is the new one. And again, they're making them all nice red colors, which makes it difficult to see. But isolating them, which I didn't put the graphs here, but isolating them, if anything, the slope is coming down more. It's a little less, but it's roughly the same. And so you can see here, it looks like maybe it's a little higher. And if you look, these upper red ones are the new group, the XBB.1.6. And so again, this line maybe is 5% lower, and the other line is doing it. But the bottom line, going back to what we had projected before, and the question of, is there anything to worry about? No. If anything, we're getting fewer mutations, which is what you'd expect. Because if the body has an immune system and there's a certain range of mutations that will still be effective with and helpful with that, as the virus groupings start migrating into it, they're going to have fewer and fewer opportunities to make a mutation that will allow them to compete better. And so we should see the mutation rate coming down if it's driven at all by the environment that it's in. If it's just driven by a clock, then the mutation rate will continue, which I think it will, but we're not going to see those mutations that aren't competitive. And so at the end of the day, whether it's driven just by a clock or whether it's driven by the competitive environment, the only ones we're going to see are those that are competing effectively. And so the mutation rate, I think, should be coming down, and we're seeing a little bit of it, certainly no increase.
We've been, the Cool Beans have been appreciating your blue shirt and the beard.
Oh, do they like it?
Absolutely. So check this out.
Ah, thank you, Patty.
And how about this?
Ah, very good. My wife got me these shirts in various colors, and I like them. They living in Texas, these shirts are nice and not too hot, but they block the sun. They're set up to, and I have of course, I have a device to measure UV radiation, and I made sure that these shirts actually don't leak it, so I don't get sunburned or have a problem with the hot Texas sun. And I wear a cowboy hat all the time too. I got that from at Buc-ee's, which all Texans will know about Buc-ee's, or most of them will. But thank you for your kind comments. Now let's talk about excess deaths. We've had an ongoing discussion, and there's some other people who have pushed very hard for the excess deaths. And the last time I was saying, see, the excess deaths are coming down, and it may just be a variation. It looks like the deaths are coming down, but the historical deaths are coming down even faster. And so we're creating we now have another zone of more significant excess deaths going on in the UK. And again, Office of National Statistics, they're even slower than the CDC, although I think they're more accurate. And this data is as of March 31st. Okay.
Got it.
The last 2 times ago, I presented data from the OECD. And for the first 5 weeks of the year, I'm not updating it because they haven't updated their data. They only have the first 5 weeks of the year. And again, they were showing that the excess deaths reported in the OECD were 18% higher, and they came down and actually had a -5. So they had 5% lower deaths, which is actually is 12 deaths. So let's keep in mind what we're talking about here. The 18% higher were 800 deaths in a week. Okay. And so if you look at these numbers, it's in the order of magnitude across the whole OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Developed Nations, and it's the US, the UK, France, Great Britain, all of them together. And the decrease that we have now, 3.5%, it's 12 people. And so the average deaths were 300. Excess deaths were 300 per week if we average them all together, which is 5%. So again, there may be something going on here, but let's not get people too excited that this is, you're going to have half of the people dead. No. As soon as the next time I go and take a look, the OECD probably will add 20 weeks to the data they've collected. And one of the problems is it's a volunteer thing from governments. And if 5 governments don't turn in their data, they probably aren't going to report anything because they don't want to say, hey, no one likes the OECD. No one gave us data. The most I saw was one nation's data not there when they went through. So my bet is they're going to wait till they have all of it. They're more interested in being accurate than being precise, just like the Office of National Statistics in the UK is slow, but they want to be sure they get it right. So I'm not criticizing it, but just saying I can't update it if I don't have the data from them. And they probably can't update their stuff if they don't have the data from Portugal or Spain or whoever.
Got it.
Okay, now we'll do the depressing thing. Puppies will be after the depression, or puppies singular. This is from the CDC site, and this is showing an age-adjusted suicide rates by gender. They say sex. I'm surprised the CDC hasn't taken that word out, but maybe they will next time. So females started at about 4, and males started at about 17, the average about 11. It's gone up in the last little whiles, come down a little bit, and then come back up. And this change here between 2018 to 21, I don't know, but we're having a statistically significant increase. And we're having now above 20 per 100,000. Again, it's not 200 or 2,000 out of 100,000, it's 20. Every one is a tragedy, but again, I don't want to overstate what's going on. I don't want to be a fearmonger. And this data is just through 2021, because again, they're very slow in pulling this stuff together, perhaps because they want to be right or for whatever reason. The data tends to be a couple years out of date all the time. And it has been for decades coming out of the CDC and the federal government. But we're seeing that the footnotes, male, female, and total, I didn't read those. A male is whatever they're putting as a male and a female. And if I want to argue with it, then I don't have any data. So I have to just accept. But in the last 6 months, we're having a significant increase of males, females being roughly flat, males going up. And so the total is going up. So what this would tend to say operationally is we probably need to raise our threshold of concern about suicide. If we see someone who is depressed or whatever, given the rates are a little higher than they've been before, 17 to 25, that's a significant increase for males. and women not as much, going from 4 to about 6, maybe 5, 6. We probably should be more aware and sensitive, trying to help people or help them find something. So now we have the suicide rate for males broken down by age. Well, Skyfrog, you and I weren't around when Roosevelt was president, because he was out telling people that it wasn't a recession, it was a mere depression in the economy. And that's where the term depression came from. So then we got the flip, that depression was worse than a recession, and now we have two terms for the same thing. So
I have another question. Giladoni says, was there prior depression diagnosis or COVID preceding the depression or suicide?
CDC did not answer that question, just like they did not differentiate between those that were vaccinated or unvaccinated, those who were currently having COVID or currently having pneumonia or anything else. They just have age-adjusted rates by gender. Now, does everyone know what age-adjusted rates mean? What it means is they calculate the rate for each age, and then they weight it going back for what the population shows. So if they have, for example, if we go up to for men, if we go up to the age-adjusted group, let's say for some reason they lack data, that they only got 40% of the 75s and olders. For some reason it was missing. They would increase this number by a quarter when they added it back in to make sure the age-adjusted wasn't being it wasn't being affected because some statistical thing about the number of people of certain ages. We can see here, I find surprising that the 75 and older have always had the highest suicide rate.
You are correct, Giladoni.
Yeah, well, it's the
So
data.
Giladoni was saying that if there is no, and maybe that data is present, we just are not aware of it, that before the suicide, what were the causes that led to it? Are there any pointers? And I think, Giladoni, there may be more data that is forthcoming later on. But
we also
I wanted to discuss. Yeah, sorry.
And we might also get more data out of a state or out of a insurance company that looks at the people that they're insuring and saying, I have 2 million or 5 million people that are insured, and half the people that had suicide had a baby 6 months before and then got COVID. So these are the people we need to look out for.
Correct.
And the UK and Canada and some other countries that have the government providing all the healthcare and having all the data are in a much better position to try to report those kind of things than they are in the US. Because as much as we think we have a government that takes too much data or information, there's a lot that it's very difficult for them to get. But every single one pretty much is a heartbreak and a problem for them. And so I don't want to understate that, but the smallest group that we have is 10 to 14, and it seems to have gone up a fair amount, and again, leveled off in the last, 3, 4, 5 years. The 15 to 24 seem to just be increasing. 25 to 45 are going up to 44. And then we have the 65 to 74, which is the green line, which is exceeded by the 45 to 64 and the 25 to 44 at the end. And so the 65 to 74 are down a little bit in the last, since 2018. But these are all very close together. And the 75 and older came down in 2009 and has sort of been continuously increasing. And the last, between 2000 and last part of 2019 and through 21 have been increasing at a fairly high rate, and as high as it's ever been for people 75 and older dying. And this goes back for 20 years. You would think that if medical treatment of people have actually taken and made 75 people who are 75 are like they were when they were 60 before, and moving the illness back, we would see these rates going down rather than up. So it seems to me that you can look at this and say, certainly since the 2000, there's been a real failure of the whatever happiness or whatever of the 75 and older is going on, given that the suicide rate's gone from about 35 to about 42 per 100,000. That makes sense?
So there's a question from, thank you very much. There's a question from Mean Bean. Sleep pattern have been shortened during COVID. Is that depression? Some of it could be depression. There can be other reasons as well. But yes, depression does participate or contribute to this. Back to you, Paul.
We also had, going back, we also had a fairly substantial increase of suicide with the opiates, and lots of problems that have occurred with that. And it may be that people that are this old, if they get involved with the illegal drugs and whatever and come out the other end, they're thinking their life is over. They don't have an ability to recover or whatever. So I don't know. Females, 75 and older are not the highest suicide rate for females, where it was for men. Highest is 45 to 64. 65 to 74, much lower. 75 and over, even lower. But look at the 10 to 14, going from about half up to about 2. We go back for the men. 10 to 14 isn't seeing the same type of increase. So if you've got teenage girls, these appear to have something since about 2012 and a little bit before then, going back, a lesser increase, but a fairly substantial and sustained increase in suicides. So if you have kids of that age or grandkids or teaching, I think it makes sense to be doubly alert for that. And you can see the same thing going on for girls 15 to 24, seeing the same kind of increase, very parallel. 25 to 44 coming up, and then it's come down lately. Same thing with 45 to 64 has come down since about 2018. And 75 and older women, looks like it's bounced up and down, but been pretty steady at about 4. So that's what I see. Is anyone see anything else or have a comment?
No, there were a number of comments about various reasons and possibilities, which are all correct. And thank you very much. I was actually intending to talk about this as well. It's interesting that they at least have data for 21. And there are many, many factors.
Right. Here are the last 2 years of the study showing race. Whites have the highest suicide after American Indians or Alaska Natives. This group has been carved out by the CDC, but it usually has an asterisk saying that there are too few to really be representative. And I imagine if we're talking about suicide rates that are down, that these numbers probably don't have nearly as many people as the others do. I'm not trying to say the rates aren't there or that they aren't important. I'm just saying we may see more bouncing around, and a year or two being high is probably artificially easier to occur here than not. And they only showed 2 years for the data. They didn't go back any farther. But then it goes from whites, Asian, Hispanic, and Black. Now, this has perhaps been a little depressing, and I've got something to talk about here. There's a book that's come out called The Good Life. It's the world's longest scientific study of happiness. Two guys out of Harvard, and they've had two people leading it, and they've handed it off, I think, 3 or 4 times to different groups. And it's not a paper, it's a book going forward. And I'm reading it, and I had a little more happiness, as you can see. I were able to get it out of the library. I didn't have to buy it. But
I love this study.
If you're looking for if you're trying to find happiness, you're trying to see where other people have this book, longest study, it's not a bad place to look at it. It's written pretty well. It's written primarily from examples where they say, oh, look at this person. Out of the group that's here, this was the guy that was the happiest. This was the guy that was almost the most unhappy. Look how their lives were different and what's going on.
And for a primer, there is a TED talk as well about this.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Now, what else could pick up spirits? My puppy. This is where he sleeps. He sleeps under my bed. So unlike Drbeen, who has his cat walk on top of it, my dog goes underneath the bed. And since he weighs about 60 pounds, if he came up on the bed, that would be an awakening experience.
Yeah. So not just the allergies, there'd be more issues.
There would be more kinetic issues, to borrow a term from the U.S. military. And he's a mixture like almost all of us are, but he has a lot of the Malamute or the Belgian Shepherd in him. It's the biggest dog I've had. He's a little over 60 pounds. And there he is. And here's the tug that he has. And he likes to do stuff. And when I stop doing it, he'll lie down and wait. You can see he's monitoring me, so he doesn't have to look. And if I ever get up, he's going to be ready to go.
That is so funny.
And here is his favorite thing. He likes to play ball. And this way, he's not touching me, but he can smell. And if my foot goes away, his eyes are going to open, and he's going to give me another opportunity to play ball. And he's very well behaved, mostly. I mean, sometimes he gets puppy excited still, but he does hand signals and verbal commands. If I put my hand up for him to jump, he can easily jump higher than my shoulder is. So anyway, hopefully from the depressing news about suicide and whatever, your spirits have been lifted with that book and with the puppy.
Thank you very much.
Now, this is my last thing to talk about the effect of promotions and elections on leaders, okay? I've got 2 curves here, and if anyone is like me, a chemical engineer, you may have heard about McCabe-Thiele diagrams for distillation columns, and that's what it's taken from. But for the rest of you, don't worry about that. It's derived from some science stuff. If we have a curve here that says this curve is curved because of its history, it could be straight, but saying if we have a piracy factor, okay, the tendency of someone to lie, cheat, and steal. And you can say, I know some people who have a greater tendency than others, and we can define piracy differently, but you can put everybody sort of on a graph and say, okay, this person is more likely to do it and that person is less likely to do it. And what I've observed over the years is if we start off, this is promotion level 1, and we have somebody who has, we're going to start with 0 as the piracy factor because this is just the baseline. And then we're going to start separating people as they get promoted. Certain people are going to get promoted and certain people aren't going to get promoted. And if we look here at 1, you notice I have suggested that the people that are promoted have a greater piracy factor than the people that are not. And why is that? Well, because I don't think they're bad pirates. If they're effective pirates and they lie, cheat, and steal, they will do better at the promotion than someone equally skilled who won't lie, cheat, and steal, right? If you're a salesman and you're reporting sales for the month that is effective, and you have a sale that came in the first day of the next month, are you going to put it in this month's thing and get it look better and get promoted? Or are you going to follow the rules and put it in next month and not get promoted? Well, that guy will get promoted, okay? Then we come over here, and it may be here we're ready for the next promotion, and we've already gone from a level 0, or my diagram, up to 2.5. And so we go to 2.5, and we have the next promotion. You're welcome, Meeple Art. Glad to have the puppy picture. When this person gets promoted, this is a promotion where it's not just an entry level, and so he has much greater, or she has much greater anonymity and a much greater chance to further himself by lying, cheating, and stealing. So we're now at a 4 level. And we come over here to where the 4 level is. When the next promotion occurs, we're now going to be at a 7 level, 7.5. And we go to the 7.5. When this person gets promoted, we're now almost at a 9. And so the question comes back to, why is it that politicians seem to lie, cheat, steal, abuse people of whatever gender they're attracted to and do horrible things? And the same thing with leaders in companies and leaders in religious organizations and leaders in medical leadership groups and whatever. Well, I think this is what's happening, is that if we don't control for the piracy factor, we're going to get it. In the old days, we didn't have that so much because we had the son of the founder was going to lead the company. It didn't matter whether he was a pirate or he wasn't. He was going to get there. And it wasn't competing at 4 levels and cheating enough to get to the lead. The son or the daughter was going to be the leader no matter what. And so you sort of had an independent of the piracy effect. But if we have an organization that is trying to promote based simply on merit, or if it's a politician based on how well they get votes, which has nothing to do with piracy, what's going to happen is those that want to take advantage, want to steal from their people, want to have lots of young, excitable people running around in their group or whatever, they're willing to pay a little more, to cheat a little more to get the role. And the way our system is set up, we shouldn't be surprised. And so you get a CEO that steals from the company, and the board of directors turns to him and says, Mobeen, why did you steal from the company? And Mobeen says, I've always been a pirate. He says, yes, but we want to steal for the company, not from the company. He says, look, I'm not a moron. I know the minute I steal from the company, I'm fired. I waited till I could get the most. I'm not saying this is true everywhere, but doesn't this sort of ring true and explain why it is that we seem to constantly have, whether we're picking conservative, liberal, libertarian, whatever, we always seem to be picking the worst possible people from their actions that get in leadership positions. And to me, this is sort of explained, maybe that's what's happening.
Thank you very much. Cool. So
that's the young.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much for the time. Let's see if there is any comment or question before we break for today. Nipa says very, very well explained.
Thank you for your kind words.
Michelle thinks she has a good example. Alima says, Eid Mubarak. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Excellent. So there are more comments that you can read. So with this, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, Cool Beans. I would see you on Monday. Again, Monday and Tuesday, we'll talk. Actually, not even on Tuesday, because I have a Zoom webinar for another company, and they put it at 6 o'clock sharp. So either I'll do it before or I'll not do it. Wednesday, I'll fly out for the FLCCC conference. I'm presenting their long COVID and methylene blue. And then on the 1st, I will come back. So I would have a gap for that as well. In the meantime, stay safe, happy, healthy. I'll see you for sure on Monday. Thank you, Paul.
You're quite welcome. Have a good meal, celebratory meal.
Thank you. Bye-bye.